Welcome to our podcast. We're excited to be here today. My name is Rick Durfee. I'm the senior attorney at Durfee Law Group, an estate planning law group and probate law group. And we are very excited to talk to you today. We've got a great program lined up.
Hey, everybody. This is Michael Koberlein, associate attorney here at Durfee Law Group, and glad to be with you.
So today we're going to talk about integrated planning. And this is kind of the follow-up of all the stuff we've been doing up till now. We've been talking about trusts and LLCs and the family bank and the family office, and we're going to try and tie all that together and show how it all works today.
So one of the things that I want to mention too is we're bringing this to you in collaboration with Bliss Realty and Grand Canyon Title Agency, some great professional advisors. And one of the things that actually, that's a great segue into what we'll be talking about, as Rick mentioned, the integrated planning. One of the key ingredients of integrated planning is a strong and efficient advisor team. So, Rick, can you tell us a little bit about how a team of advisors can help us in our integrated planning?
Absolutely. And I'm going to refer to our diagram here. And in fact, we will look at this a lot today because this diagram has got all these various pieces on it that show all these planning pieces. And right up at the top of the diagram, you can see we've got the advisory team listed up there. The lawyers, the investment advisor, the insurance people, the accounting, the real estate advisors and key people. And there obviously could be others. For anyone that's serious about their financial life, about their business life, they need to have the equivalent of what might be called a board of directors or just advisors that they can consult with. If you're going to be doing anything significant financially or business-wise, you're going to have insurance needs and banking needs and investment needs and real estate needs. And so that team of advisors, for the planning to be integrated, they got to work together. They need to be looking at the same information. They need to be aware of all the planning and structures that you have in place so that they don't step on each other's toes. And a classic example, something that happens a lot, frankly, is a client will go to their advisors and they'll ask for advice, and their accountant and their lawyer will give conflicting advice. And I guarantee you, whenever that happens, one or the other doesn't have all the facts. And when the accountant and the lawyer get together and say, hey, these are the facts. Oh, well, now that I know that, yes, I agree with whatever you were saying. So the advisory team's got to be in the loop. They've got to be looking at the same set of facts, which is, again, one of the reasons, frankly, why we use this diagram that we're going to be reviewing as we go through these structures, because it gives us a one-page overview so that we can see all the pieces, how they fit together, how they're owned, how the assets flow, how the properties flow, how the cash flows, how the tax liabilities flow, so that the advisory team can then, based on that accurate information, give quality advice.
Right. Okay. So if I understand what you're saying, then attorneys know certain things, CPAs know certain things, financial advisors know certain things, real estate agents know certain things. When you have those advisors, those professionals working together, then it's a lot better for the person getting the planning than if you were to just have one member on the team.
Yeah. To use a sports metaphor, it's like if you had a lineup and everybody was the quarterback, the other team's going to clobber you. They're going to kill you because they have team members that are specialized for a particular task. And here the same thing is true. As the law firm, we can't do what the real estate professionals do or what the accountants do, and we don't sell insurance and we don't manage money. So other people need to do those tasks. And likewise, they can't and shouldn't do what the lawyer does. And in fact, one of the danger signals, in my opinion, on this is when somebody tries to do the other person's job. And it's one thing for a professional to say, you know what, I recognize enough to know that you need this, but I can't deliver this. So let's go get a professional that does this particular thing. And it's another thing to say, oh, you need this, let me do that for you. So I don't want to, as the lawyer, we don't want to be your accountants. We don't want to be your insurance people or your investment people. And frankly, we don't want them practicing law. So we need to know enough to be able to send you to those professionals, and they need to know enough to send you to other professionals, including us, when the time is right.
And you mentioned the quarterback, and I've heard you say this before when we have worked with other advisors. We don't necessarily need to be the ones in charge. We just want to be a part of the team, and we want to make sure that there's collaboration that's for the best of the client. So that's one of the things I think that some people might worry about when they look at having a team of advisors. They don't want people to have conflict. And so part of that, I think, is going to be up to the client to find a team of people that they can trust, that they know can work well together. And I think that's just part of the integrated planning that we are encouraging people to engage in. Getting to that, I would ask you a few different questions, because not everybody's going to want a very complex and challenging plan because they just don't need it. So one question is, what is integrated planning? The second question is, what are the basics that a person needs just starting out?
Well, a compound question. Lawyers love those. So you are right. Not everybody needs everything we're going to talk about today. And we're going to start with some of the simple things and then move from simple to more complex. And everybody will be somewhere along that scale, and will need whatever is right for wherever they're at. But part of integrated planning is anticipating the future and where it's going. And let me give you an example. Some years ago, my wife and I, we've always loved looking at houses, and we like bargains. And we had a big and growing family, and we were looking for a big house. And we found this house that was really big, and the price per square foot was ridiculously small and just seemed odd and strange in the market. So we made an appointment to go see the house. And as we went to see the house, it was a very large home. It was like a 10,000 square foot home. So it was gigantic. But as we went to see the house, what we discovered is that this really huge home had been built, and it had started from a little tiny 1,200 square foot, 3-bedroom, 1.25 bath house. And it had been added upon one room at a time. And the resulting structure was, to say the least, bizarre. There were whole major sections of the house that the only way you could get to was to go through a bedroom and a closet and a bathroom. There were features that were actually quite lovely, but because of the way it was put together, it was impractical and unusable. And it was no wonder it was selling cheap, because the way it was designed just made no sense. So part of integrated planning is, even if you're going to start small, even if you're going to, or just at the beginning, I don't have a lot of money, and I may never have a lot of money, but I have something, it's appropriate to start with the end in mind. I had to quote some famous people, but to begin with a plan that can be added upon in a rational, cohesive, logical way, so that pieces can be added as they make sense. And I guess another metaphor I like, it's like the old-fashioned rack stereo systems, and this will date me, I guess. I don't know if they do this anymore, but you can buy these stereo systems where you have a rack and components go in or go out. So, hey, they just added, I remember when they invented the CD player, yippee-ki-yay. So we could buy the CD player and put it in the rack, and it fit right in. There was a place for it to go and a place for the wires to go. So a lot of integrated planning is just knowing that we're not going to be done when we start. There's going to be change over time, anticipating that and having a rational plan so that when the change happens, we have a place for it to go so that it fits and makes sense. So then your other question was, well, where do people start? And I want to mention this here, and we'll make this really big so people can see this, and it's stunningly obvious, I hope. The planning that everybody needs, if you're over the age of 18, is a will and a general power of attorney, medical power of attorney, and a living will. And we're not going to spend a lot of time on this or on any of the other detailed things other than to say, this is the beginning. If you're an adult, this is like having a driver's license or an ID card and a checking account and doing a tax return. It's part of growing up. It's part of being a mature, functional adult individual. You should have these documents. Whether you have kids or whether you have money or not, they're important for just making simple decisions. And here's a concept that is important. And in fact, all the planning that we talk about here is based upon true principles. And Michael and I had this conversation earlier today. True principles are things that are true whether you believe them or not, whether you know about them or not, and they're going to work whether you understand them or not. And let me give you one. You can make decisions about what's going to happen in your life, or if you don't, somebody else will make those decisions for you. Now, that's just the way things are. So there are some decisions that you can make. For example, you can decide whether or not to accept or decline medical treatment. Well, what happens if you are incapacitated and you can't communicate? Well, then the other thing you can decide now while you are capacitated and can communicate is, who do you want to make those decisions for you if for any reason you are unable to communicate? And that's part of what these documents do here, is they designate decision makers. Well, if I'm not able to make these decisions for myself, instead of leaving this up to the courts or the lawyers or a family fight, I'm going to designate these persons over here and they can make those decisions on my behalf. That's the beginning where everybody should start. And
okay, so that's the basics, you're saying?
Yes. And those then tie to this next piece here, which let me back up a little bit so it's a little more visible. The revocable trust. And this is a common thing. People are very familiar with a trust these days. Trusts are the engine that drive estate planning in the United States and in most common law countries that base their laws on laws that originated actually in Rome, but then through Europe and England. The trust idea is a contract that controls what happens to property over time. And the basic documents that we have need to be tied to, connected with, integrated with your trust so that they work together. And when we review estates and trusts, one of the things we often discover is that they don't work together. They're like that house that was built one room at a time. They're connected, but in an irrational and dysfunctional way. So they need to work together. And with a trust, I just want to mention, this trust is going to avoid probate. It's going to, it can help with some estate taxes depending on the size of the estate. It can actually help with qualifying parties for assistance for long-term health care, in a manner that can reduce how much has to be spent down to zero before you qualify. But then also, very importantly, this trust can manage how and when assets transition to the next generation and do so in a healthy manner. And part of integrating this trust is to make sure that it is funded. And so I have another story. My own, well, a relative of mine, I will just say, a relative of mine who has long since passed away, who lived in a place far away from me, set up a trust. And it was actually a pretty decent trust. But then his lawyer gave him some really bad advice. The lawyer said, oh, you don't need to transfer all of your real estate and your bank accounts and your properties to the trust, because if you do, you are giving up your privacy. And that, first of all, was bad advice and just a false statement. But secondly, the lawyer said, and besides, you have a will here that provides that in the event of your death, all of your assets will pour over to the trust. So everything will go into your trust when you die. That's what the lawyer told this relative of mine. Now, what the lawyer didn't say is the process to get the will to pour over those assets into the trust was what?
Probate.
Probate, exactly. So we had to go to court. We had to spend a year in court. And the lawyer charged 5 or 6 times as much for the probate as he charged for the trust. And so the lawyer double dipped is the bottom line. And by giving bad advice, the lawyer was able to charge more and cause the family additional expenses and delay in administering the estate. So to be integrated, and this is a key thing, when you have a trust, it has to be funded. So the property that you have needs to be conveyed to the trust. And we tried to illustrate this on the diagram here. And I want to just hit this briefly. This is kind of a list of things that should be in the trust. Everything in your house, all your personal property, if you have any employment benefits. And we actually prepare a conveyance instrument transferring those things to the trust. That's why on the diagram here, you can see the little green arrow. So if you come to us and we've done this for you, we will note the day and the year and the time at which that happens. And then all your personal bank accounts, contingent beneficiaries on IRAs, and maybe your auto, those need to go into the trust as well. And you'll note here the little orange triangle on our diagram. Typically, you have to do that. No law firm can do that for you. You're going to be working with, guess who? Your advisory team, your real estate professionals, your banking professionals, your insurance professionals, and investment advisors to make sure that all of those things are transferred into the trust. And then 2 other things that are sadly often forgotten. And I'm going to start in the bottom here, your personal residence. To the extent that you own real estate, it needs to be deeded into the trust. And then business interests. And I see this a lot, frankly, with people who go to large law firms that are compartmentalized, where they have those estate planning people over there and they're part of the office, and the real estate and business people over here in this other part of the office. And so they have appropriately set up business entities to own their businesses and own their business properties. But those business entities are not integrated. They're not owned by the trust. They're owned individually by the person. So inadvertently, by creating those business entities and causing them to be owned in the way they are, they're subjecting that client to a future probate and to succession issues and potential litigation over who gets what in the estate because the business interests are not owned by the trust. So one of the things that makes a plan integrated is we make sure, somebody needs to make sure that all those things actually get put in the trust, which is why when we're working with somebody to do an estate plan, we ask them to tell us, what have you got? What are your business interests? What do you own and how do you own it? And we need to see the deeds. We need to see the LLC documents and the corporate documents. And why do we need to see that? Because we want your plan to be integrated. We want everything to be funded properly in that trust. So that's the basics of estate planning and the basics of integrated planning right there. Those 2 things that we've mentioned, those basic documents and that revocable trust, that's the entry level that most people are going to come into this kind of planning with, and where that integration begins to matter.
So if I'm an 18-year-old who has just graduated from high school or whatever, and you mentioned that that's kind of the beginning of the spectrum with the basic documents. How far do I go down that spectrum before I determine that I'm someone who needs a revocable trust?
That is the perfect question. Thank you. Thank you for asking that, because here's the idea. What's the trigger? When do I know I need a trust? And there's a couple of triggers that people that are not always intuitive. One is the probate threshold, and that for most jurisdictions is about $75,000. If you have $75,000 of assets, your estate is subject to a probate. Now there's alternatives. There's things you can do like beneficiary designations and so forth that can help avoid probate. But $75,000 of net worth is one issue. Another issue is if you own real estate. So the first time you buy a house, you need a trust. But another one that gets by a lot of people is when you have children. So let me elaborate on your example here. The 18-year-old is now a 26-year-old and married and has a child. and this married couple is trying to be responsible, and they go buy life insurance in case the breadwinner dies unexpectedly, so that there's cash available to support the family. And when they look at their finances, they go, wow, between our student loans and our car loan and the mortgage on our house, we really have no equity in our life. In fact, we're upside down. We're insolvent. Our debts exceed our assets, but they have life insurance. So here's the question. If the event that you have purchased insurance to protect your family from happens, what's going to happen? So, and the question is, if you die, what's going to happen? So mommy and daddy die, which is rare that happens, but it's not non-existent. We've been doing this for long enough that I've seen it happen more times than I care to think about it. And it's always ugly and tragic when the parents of young children die. But when there's life insurance on the table, now will the life insurance company write a check to the minor child? And the answer is no. In fact, what they will require is that the minor child have a guardian and a conservator appointed. Now, the guardian will have custody of their body, will have physical custody of the person. The guardian, the child will come live with the guardian and be raised by the guardian. But the conservator will manage the child's money. We'll get that life insurance policy. And when you have a conservatorship, first of all, you're spending several $1,000s to go to court and get the conservator appointed. Then every year you have to go back to court and account for what happened. So there's several $1,000s of accounting and legal fees every year that you have to spend on that money, which if you start with $100,000, you still have to have that conservatorship, and you're still spending a couple $1,000s a year for this. And then when that child turns 18, they go to court and they have a conversation with the judge, and it goes something like this. The judge says, so you're 18. And the kid says, yeah. And the judge says, do you want the money? And the kid says, yeah. The judge says, okay. And they give it to him. And why do they give it to him? Because they're 18. They're an adult now. They have a right to have it. And unless there's some overriding compelling reason, you're in jail, you're incompetent, you're mentally ill, and to adjudicate an 18-year-old as incompetent, even when they're doing catastrophically stupid things, is really difficult. You're entitled to do stupid things when you're 18. And most of us who can remember when we were 18 go, yeah, I did stupid things when I was 18. But what happens if you have a whole bunch of money suddenly when you're 18 and you have grown up without the benefit of your parents and having suffered the emotional trauma of losing them at a tender age? What's the probability that you're going to do really, really stupid things with that money? And the answer is high. You're going to do really dumb stuff. So even the family that says, wow, we're broke, we're insolvent. Do we need that trust? Yeah, they need that trust. So that trust is a level of planning that comes in earlier than people think.
Okay, so it sounds like one of the triggers may be life insurance. Another trigger may be real estate. For those who are just starting out but have some assets beyond maybe a vehicle or something like that. Okay, well, we've talked a little bit about revocable trusts, and one of the things that I like to point out is that we talk about our trusts a little bit differently and call them a revocable dynasty trust or an irrevocable dynasty trust, and we do dynasty planning. So one of my questions is, how is dynasty planning a part of integrated planning?
So one of the things that makes planning integrated is that we consider not just where the family or the money or the wealth is today, but where it's going to be over time. I heard Jordan Peterson, and people love or hate him, but he said, if you're really going to evaluate a decision, you have to think in terms not only of what are the consequences of that decision now, but what are the consequences of that decision over the entire time of my existence? So today, 5 years from now, 20 years from now, 100 years from now, when I'm dead and in the grave. And estate planning is very much that way. And traditional, simple estate planning is focused on death. What happens when we die? And how do we get the stuff that we owned the dead person owned now to the next generation. And it's single-use throwaway documents. Okay, we avoided probate, throw the trust away. With dynasty planning, we're thinking beyond that. We're thinking downstream. We're thinking, well, okay, what's going to happen with that money when it goes to the next generation? How old are they going to be? What are their needs going to be? What are their risks going to be? How do we structure that wealth in such a manner that it benefits the next generation but doesn't hurt them? How do we structure it so that the next generation enjoys the fruit of that inheritance, but is protected from doing stupid stuff or having it taken away from them by a marital problem or a substance abuse problem or a medical problem or a bad business decision? And so dynasty planning focuses on integrating the generations. It's multi-generational. And you mentioned the irrevocable trust, and I'm going to come back to our diagram here.
I just want to interject one thing, and that is for those of you who are trying to remember dynasty planning, and maybe you need a visual. Rick mentioned that it's downstream planning or looking beyond death. So I've got a stream here for you to connect that with dynasty planning.
So I'm telling you the story. I have a client, a wonderful lady. She happens to be Chinese, and she came from China, so she speaks Chinese. And we were talking about dynasty planning, and she says, "Oh, you Americans, you don't understand what a dynasty is." She said, "You think you know what it is, but you have no idea." And she said, "I know that everything I have was my mother's, and it was her mother's before her, and her mother's before her, and her mother's before her. And I'm only holding it temporarily for my children. And so my responsibility is to not eat it up, but to make it grow." And she gets to enjoy it and have the benefit of it while she's here, but she gets it. So that culture of seeing that the family is an integrated unit that spans multiple generations. It's not just the people that happen to live in the same house today, but that it's a multi-generational, long-term organism that came from somewhere and is going somewhere, and that what we do with the property and the assets has an effect on that. We want to understand that dynasty. So another key element here that we need to talk through if we're going to do this planning is the irrevocable trust. And this is another component of the dynasty planning that comes into play. And I want to note a couple of things about this trust. This is out of the taxable estate. It's unavailable to creditors, and it's designed, again, to be multi-generational. So to be brief, when do we need this? We need this when we're buying large life insurance policies, when we have complex business structures, when we're doing asset protection, or when we're simply thinking and wanting to have multi-generational planning. And for this structure to be integrated, if you can see on the diagram here, it's going to be connected to all the other stuff. And one of the key elements right here that we're going to talk through in just a second here is this trust is going to own a fractional share of the business interests. That is really, really key and a very powerful component of an integrated plan. That fractional ownership of the business interest in this irrevocable dynasty trust gives us a lot of benefits that we're going to talk through. And there's other technical details that we don't need to address here, but I want to mention a few. Mommy and daddy, the client, typically create the trust. They don't get to be the trustee. However, somebody else is going to be the trustee. And typically the children and the grandchildren are going to be the initial beneficiaries of this dynasty trust.
So dynasty trust meaning the irrevocable trust. So you mentioned asset protection. Is a irrevocable dynasty trust an asset protection trust?
The short answer is yes. The long answer is a little more complicated than that. There's such a thing as what's called a self-settled asset protection trust, where you create a trust for your own benefit and put assets in it that are protected from your creditors. And a couple of states started with this, Nevada and Delaware and a couple of others. And they've become very popular. In fact, our state, Arizona, is now, there's pending legislation making it possible to do that here. And even though those are popular, I am of the opinion that they are less effective than other strategies. It's kind of like a one size fits all suit. You have to be exactly the right body size for that one size fits all suit to actually fit you. And most situations require a little more customization. And this particular irrevocable dynasty trust is a planning device that we use to help protect assets. But one of the things that makes it superior to the self-settled asset protection trust is that the person we're trying to protect is not the trustee and is not the beneficiary. And this is totally excluded from their estate for estate tax purposes and from their assets for other purposes like bankruptcy. And something a lot of people don't know is those self-settled asset protection trusts, for example, in a bankruptcy scenario, have a 10-year clawback period. So if you've put assets in that trust within the last 10 years, they can be clawed back and grabbed and pulled into your bankruptcy estate, and the creditors can get it. So with this dynasty, with the irrevocable dynasty trust, where you're not the trustee and you're not the beneficiary, we don't have that problem. Now, there are other statutes of limitations that do apply, and we have to avoid nasty things. In fact, let me find this on the diagram right here. We have to avoid fraudulent conveyances. And what does that mean? So when we're doing asset protection, this is part of integrating here, that all transactions are to or among the entities are for value. That means we pay a price. We get something in return. We get consideration. So if I give you, if entity A gives entity B something worth $100, you get something worth $100 back. And they are done for the purpose of creating more wealth, more income, which increases the ability to meet the financial obligations. So we're never doing something for free. We're not just giving away stuff without consideration, with some exceptions. And we're never doing something for the purpose of avoiding lawful debts. Rather, our purpose is fundamentally to create more business income and greater assets so that we can pay our lawful liabilities. It's interesting that transactions that don't meet these criteria are called a fraudulent conveyance, and they are avoidable in a contested proceeding, so that creditors can say, yeah, treat that transaction as if it never happened, and claw it back and reach those assets. So if we're truly trying to protect assets, we don't want to have those kind of fraudulent conveyances.
Okay, so it sounds like, with your example before, that a self-settled trust or an asset protection trust is one that really, if you're the beneficiary and you're also the grantor, meaning the person who created the trust for their own benefit, then there's this 10-year clawback or look back period that if you are in any kind of bankruptcy proceeding, that the assets in that trust are fair game for the bankruptcy trustee. And so then maybe one solution, if you wanted greater protection than having that kind of issue where you have a 10-year clawback, is to maybe look at one of these irrevocable dynasty trusts as a planning tool.
Yes, is the short answer.
Yeah.
And
just want to make sure I understood what you were saying.
And I don't want to be too hard on the asset protection trusts, the self-settled asset protection trust. They have a place. We've used them. We do use them. We have many clients that have them. It's just that they have a specific and narrow use, and there's a range in which they're good and effective. And the challenge we have is, while they're good and effective in this range, people try to use them in this bigger range where they're not good and effective, and they don't understand the limits. So, which comes back to what makes a plan integrated. one of the things that makes a plan integrated is understanding the best use for the structures that we have and deploying them for that which they are best suited, and not trying to get them to do things that they're not suited for. Which, by the way, let me mention, because I can see it on the diagram and this just occurred to me. People have these IRAs and they have lots of money tucked away in these IRAs. And the best and most tax efficient use of an IRA, and I'm using IRA, by the way, to include all kinds of retirement plans, 401ks and the like. The best and most tax efficient use for those kinds of structures and assets is to pay for and provide cash flow during the retirement of an individual. And we get the clue for this in the very name of the entity. I stands for individual, R stands for retirement. So this is for an individual's retirement. And when we try to use an IRA as a wealth transfer device, I want to leave money to my children, and the money I want to leave them is the money in my IRA. That becomes terribly inefficient. And we've recently seen this with a law that was recently passed called the Secure Act, where they took away a planning feature. People used to be able to transfer an IRA to generation 2, and the second generation, the non-spousal beneficiaries, could stretch that IRA over their lifetime, and they took that away. And now generation 2, the maximum they can go is 10 years on that, and sometimes they can only go 5 years under certain circumstances. They're compelled to take the money out of the IRA, whether they want to or not. And so what does that mean? And why did the politicians do that? And to just be blunt, the politicians did that because it was a clever way of generating tax revenue without raising tax rates. By compelling the money to come out of the retirement plans, that act of coming out of the retirement plan is a taxable event. So we're compelling a taxable event that we can tax and create revenue, and we can apply that projected revenue against projected spending, so they can pat themselves on the back about how they did something to close the deficit, and they can generate more tax revenue and say, oh, I've never raised taxes, and they haven't, but they have in fact passed legislation that resulted in more taxes being collected. So what's the most tax efficient thing to do with your IRA? Withdraw the money while you're alive. And when I say you, let's include spouses. So if you're married, that includes husband and wife or whatever other modern form of marriage you might have. Between spouses, take the money out during your life or your spouse's life. And then if you're say, well, I have more in my IRA than I need for my retirement. This is an example of when that Dynasty Trust would come in, the Irrevocable Dynasty Trust. I don't need the $3 million or the $1 million or the $10 million in my IRA for my retirement. I have other stuff. So what do we want to do with that? This is what we want to do. We want to help you get that IRA money into this Irrevocable Dynasty Trust. And often we will work with your advisory team to help buy life insurance on somebody, if not you, on your spouse, and if not you or your spouse, on one of your children in this Dynasty Trust, so that we can create tax-free money. So that's another example of how a plan is integrated. We're going to look at those IRAs and think through, well, what are they for? What's the most tax-efficient use? When should we take the money? What should we do if we have more in there than we actually need for retirement? What's the most tax efficient way to get that wealth that I don't need to my children? And what if I don't have children? That's another question. And we'll answer that question when we get to the family foundation, if we move along fast enough here.
So going back to, maybe we can refer to it as the integrated planning path, or the spectrum I talked about earlier, where you have the 18-year-old who's got the basic documents, the will and the durable general and the medical power of attorney and the living will. And then maybe you move down the path a little further. You're 26 now and you've got a child and you're married, and maybe you've got a house, so you have a living trust. And then you're moving a little further down the spectrum, and you talked about some things with respect to an irrevocable trust. So who is an irrevocable trust a good fit for, and what are some of the uses that can be made for somebody who has an irrevocable trust?
So here's the trigger. When do we need the irrevocable trust? And I kind of mentioned this, but it's good to think through this so that we're very clear. It's good for if your estate's large, and what large is a moving number. That's a bit of a political number. Today, large means more than 10 or $11 million, depending on the outcome of the pending electoral process. Large could be a significantly smaller number or not. But even under the laws as they currently stand, what constitutes large for estate tax purposes is going to change in 2026 when the federal estate tax exclusion drops from its current level back to its prior levels. So if your estate's large, and that includes, by the way, death benefits on life insurance. So issue number 2 is if you're buying significant life insurance, then that Dynasty Trust becomes a valuable tool. Issue number 3 is if you have a complex business structure, and we're going to talk through some of that here shortly. And reason number 4, trigger number 4, where the irrevocable Dynasty Trust can be useful is if you have a complex family situation. We see situations where, for example, today, the blended family is almost the norm. It's not the exception. So there's going to be children from more than one marriage. Well, how do we take care of the children from the older children from the first marriage and the younger children from the current marriage and be fair and reasonable and not cause emotional trauma to anybody feeling left out or being uncared for? Often that irrevocable Dynasty Trust can be a powerful tool in doing that. And then I guess our last trigger that we'll mention that we've already kind of hit upon is the asset protection. Sometimes when we say, well, okay, we have these business enterprises, we want to structure them going forward so that we're managing the risk, so that we're able to build and grow the wealth to lawfully meet all of our financial obligations, but so that we don't get derailed by some opportunistic, predatory litigation. How do we structure them to protect against that? And then the Dynasty Trust comes into play and will be a fractional owner in that business interest.
So yeah, you've made mention already a little bit of the family office and the family bank, fractional ownership, asset protection, these different ingredients that are part of making business structures assimilate into our integrated planning. Can we talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So the next structure that I want to address that as we're integrating in is what we loosely call the family bank here. And this can be a limited partnership. It can be an LLC. This is kind of a modernized, grown up, more evolved version of what historically back in the 70s and 80s used to be called a family limited partnership. And to understand how and why this works, I'm just going to give you a brief summary of what a limited partnership is. With a limited partnership, there's 2 kinds of partners. A general partner, you see the little GP right up there, that's for the general partner, and a limited partner, that's the limited partner right there. So that those are the 2 kinds of partners. By law, the general partner has control, and the general partner has general liability. By law, the limited partner has no control and has no liability for what happens inside the limited partnership. And because there are multiple partners here, we get certain very strong benefits. And you'll see 3 little arrows coming into this family bank. The general partner is going to be the family office, which we'll talk about next. We'll just scroll down here so you can see this family office down here. But the limited partners are what? Where do these our little arrows flow? let's look at this limited partner. The blue arrow flows over here and comes where? Oh, to the revocable family trust. And where does this green arrow from the limited partnership flow? Let's chase that down. Where does it go? Comes down here. Chase it down, 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 down. Where does it go? Oh, the Irrevocable Dynasty Trust. So with this entity here, the family bank entity, we form a partnership, and the two trusts are the limited partners, and the family office that we'll talk about here is the general partner. Now, what does this mean? This means that assets inside this limited partnership that are dangerous if they explode are contained. They're not going to get out, and they're not going to hurt the limited partners. They can hurt the general partner, but we'll talk about that. It also means that assets outside the limited partnership can't get in, or liabilities outside the limited partnership can't get in. So if the client in this situation here, we'll scroll up so we can see client, him and her here, they have a lawsuit, they have some personal liability. That personal liability can't get into the limited partnership. And let me quickly illustrate how and why that works. If Mike and I are partners, and one of you out there in our audience, you sue me, and you get a judgment against me. And remember, Mike and I are limited partners in this limited partnership. If you are able to take away my limited partnership interest from me, what does that make you with Mike? And the answer is it makes you his partner. Now, Mike, do you want to be partners with this guy?
No way.
Yeah, no way. Exactly. And we can't force Mike to be partners with the plaintiff that sued me. Mike has the right to say, no, I don't want to be your partner, and you can't make me. And Mike's right. So that ability to exclude partners means that the risk event that happens outside the partnership is not able to get into and reach the assets of the partnership. What are they entitled to? There's a remedy called a charging lien or a charging order. They're entitled to the income that flows out of that partnership. And this is not a webinar on asset protection, but the bottom line is they can't touch those assets. So what do we put in this family bank? You'll see our little list of sample assets that go into this family bank right here. It'll have its operating account, cash and investments. It might have a real estate property. It might have a note and deed of trust on the residence. It might have security instruments on other business loans. And we do that because it's loaning money out to the other entities. It might loan money to family members. And of course, it's going to own subsidiary business entities. And all of that is done. That's all done in order to integrate it into the plan. So it's integrated on many levels. It's integrated on who or what entities own the family bank and what the family bank owns and how they connect. And we do that to several business reasons. And by the way, we call this a business limited partnership and not a family limited partnership because it has a business purpose. It has non-tax, non-family business purposes, including consolidating investments, getting economies of scale, getting multi-generation participation, being able to pool capital and have a larger capital base that you wouldn't have if you were acting individually, as well as succession planning and risk management, all of which are non-tax and non-asset protection business purposes. So,
now, you mentioned earlier, as you were explaining the family bank, that there's looks like there's at least 3 partners there in the example here for the business limited partnership. What if we only had one partner? And I'm speaking more specifically to a single member managed LLC. Is the protection going to change there, or what are the differences?
Yeah, so one of the big, huge ways that people mess up their legal planning by not integrating is with the use of the single member managed LLC. And these are promoted and sold by promoters, telling consumers, oh, if you have an LLC, you're protected. And the fact of the matter is, LLCs get clobbered in the courts every day. They get in bankruptcy and in the civil courts, they are defeated over and over and over again. And how and why are they defeated? They're defeated because, and there's several ways, one of which is they don't have multiple members. It is the multiple ownership, having more than one owner, that gives that protection. That's one of the ways they get defeated. Another way they get defeated is if they're member managed and the member is the one in trouble. The bankruptcy court can say, you know, we're just going to appoint the bankruptcy trustee as the manager of this LLC instead of you because you're in bankruptcy. So now the bankruptcy trustee can reach into that LLC and grab all the assets and pull them out. And the civil courts can do the same thing. You know what? We've got a judgment against you. You're not in bankruptcy, but we have a judgment against you. And we're going to allow your judgment creditor now to be the manager of this LLC because it's member managed. We can do this to you. And so we're going to. So member managed and single member LLCs cause them to be penetrated over and over again. The other thing that happens, and this is huge, is a complete lack of documentation. Many of these LLCs that we encounter are what we call naked LLCs. To form an LLC is relatively simple. Anybody listening here, you can get online with the Arizona Corporation Commission or with 20 or 30 other states. It's pretty easy online. And form an LLC in a matter of minutes. You fill out a little form, you write them a check, and boom, you've got an LLC. Simple and easy. And you go, oh, I've got protection now, right? No, you don't. Because those online forms create what are called articles of organization that are the minimum necessary to establish the entity, but which in fact don't give you protection. In addition to having more than one owner, multiple members, and having a manager manage, not a member, but a manager manage, and it's even best if there's multiple managers, then the LLC needs to have adequate documentation, which includes things like evidence of that ownership. We need to have certificates that show these multiple members. We need to have an operating agreement, and one that is designed both for tax efficiency and that empowers one member to exclude new members from coming in, especially hostile members, or that will prevent the members from selling their interest to a hostile third party. So there's provisions that need to be in those governing documents that give rise to the protection. In the absence of those governing documents that give rise to the protection, there is no protection. So I want to emphasize this too. In fact, this is something to be integrated. This is one of those issues that our advisory team up here, these guys on the team, they don't need to be the lawyer that does this, but they shouldn't screw it up. And I've seen other advisors, every single one of them on this list, in fact, say, oh, yeah, you need an LLC. I heard a lawyer say you need one, so let me help you set one up. And they go down to the Corporation Commission and spend that 15 minutes to file it online, thinking that they've helped their client set up an LLC that's going to protect them. And the client has no protection. They're flapping in the wind. So for the advisors up here, you need to know enough to know, yeah, you need an LLC. And you need to know enough to know, yeah, what I can help you do isn't going to do the job. You need to go work with a lawyer that actually knows how to do this. And I will say the same is true of lawyers. We see lawyers set up LLCs thinking, well, I filed it with the Corporation Commission. Isn't that enough? And the answer is no. And how do we know this, by the way? And I'm going to tell another story. There was a young man who wanted to really, really succeed in life. And he decided that the way to succeed in life was to find the most successful person in his community and take him out to lunch and ask him the secret of success. So this young man called up the richest man in his town and said, can I buy you lunch? And rich people are always willing to let someone else buy the lunch for them. So he said, of course. So they're sitting at lunch, and the young man said to the old man, he said, I would like to know the secret to success. What's the secret? And the old man said, oh, that's easy. He said, okay, well, what is it? And the old man said, good decisions. He said, okay, well, that doesn't really help me. What's the secret to good decisions? And the old man said, oh, that's easy too. Experience. And the young man said, okay, that still doesn't help me. What's the secret to experience? And the old man said, oh, that's the easiest of all. Bad decisions. So let me just acknowledge, why do I know what I know about operating agreements and LLCs and multi-member things? Because I have experience. Because candidly, I've seen it done wrong and I've done it wrong and had it blow up. And say, so I'm not willing to let it blow up for my clients anymore. So how those LLCs are structured, how the limited partnership is structured, how it's integrated into the planning makes a difference on whether it actually does what people want it to do or not.
So you mentioned the family office earlier. How does the family office become a part of this integrated planning that we're talking about?
So we mentioned with the limited partnership that we wanted to have a general partner. The general partner is going to have liability. That's where this family office comes in. And if, by the way, we're using on the family bank, if we're using an LLC, the family office will not be the general partner, but it will be the manager. So this is a management company. It's owned fractionally, and you can chase the little lines up here. We show what 5.1% voting owned by the Revocable Trust, and the green arrows, which go over to the Irrevocable Trust, own 4.9% voting and 90% of the non-voting, and we call that the business hair trigger. There's hundreds of thousands of dollars, maybe millions of dollars of intellectual property in that structure right there that integrates it. Bottom line, that makes it so that mommy and daddy, him and her up here, have control, but that control cannot be taken away. And what do we do with this management company? Well, first of all, it manages. So it's going to have control over the family bank. It's going to have control over all these other subsidiary entities that we have. It's going to charge management fees. It's going to write off its business expenses, and it can have things that are actually might appear as if they are assets, but they are really liabilities, like cars and vehicles. Those might look like an asset, but they're really a liability because bad things happen with vehicles. People are in accidents and they break down and need repairs, and we spend a lot of money on cars, whether we have accidents or not. And even employees. We need our employees and we love our employees and we want to take good care of them and provide awesome benefits for them. But we do that through this management company. And oh, by the way, this can be taxed as a C Corp or as an S Corp. We can have retirement plans and other planning devices with the management company. But the bottom line is it has control. Do we put assets and things of value in the family office? And the answer is no. We put liabilities in the family office. So control and liabilities go here. Where do things of value go? They go in the bank. They go in the bank. And so the family office has control. And to be integrated, this is an example of integration. It's ownership here, owned by the trust, and it's control over the family bank. And I want to mention here briefly, this family bank, you'll see that it owns subsidiary entities, and we've got rental properties or intellectual property or the lab or whatever, or the New Deal property outside the taxable estate. And there's tons of stuff going on here that it's just beyond the scope of this event to talk about. But all of those subsidiary entities, even though they're owned by the family bank, partly, you'll see that 95% owned by the family bank, 5% by the Dynasty Trust. So there's multiple owners. How are they controlled? Look here, who's the manager? The manager of these is the management LLC, the family office. So a couple of things that stay outside this that we'll mention.
Just to simplify that, Rick, as you mentioned, the family bank is where your assets go, and then the family office is just where you keep the control.
Yes. And the reason for that is we don't want to commingle control and equity and liability. Those are three different things. We want to put equity or value and risk in two different pots. We want to keep them away from each other. We want to keep the things that explode away from the things we want to save. So we don't allow our children to play in the middle of the freeway because cars go fast and won't have time to stop before they smash them. So we keep our children off the freeway. We keep our assets that we're trying to protect out of the way of things that could cause them to be taken away from us. And we have control again in the management company. So control in the management company, equity and assets in the family bank. Now, in an integrated plan, there's some things we can't put in the family bank or the family office, and I want to mention these briefly. One is a professional practice, and this could include a law practice, many dental practices, in some places medical practices, depending on the state, sometimes a professional real estate practice, so a real estate brokerage, or architects, CPA practices, and many of these are state specific. Some states, for example, allow a medical practice to be owned, to have corporate ownership, and other states don't. Some states allow real estate practices to have corporate ownership, and others don't. So we have to comply with local rules, and often a professional practice is outside this deal. The same is true with a personal residence. And a personal residence, one is mentioned briefly here, can be owned directly by the revocable trust. And that's actually the most common and certainly the entry level. But if it's a very large or complex estate, or we have a very high equity, high value residence, a residence worth millions of dollars, is free and clear, and we want to protect it from the bad guys, there's a special use vehicle. We call it a residential LLC that can own that residence, and we protect it from the bad guys.
And part of that residential LLC is if you have lots of equity built up in there, then you can protect that from creditors, you're saying. Is that what you're?
Yeah. So yes, and let me illustrate this briefly. If you own a residence personally, or if it's owned by your revocable trust up here, and a judgment is entered against you, and that judgment is recorded in the county where your residence is at, that judgment lien automatically attaches to your residence because it's against you, and the title to your house is in you. So if you own real estate and you have a judgment and that judgment's recorded, it's going to attach against all your real estate. Well, by putting that residence in this kind of LLC, and it's a special use LLC, now you don't have title personally, so the judgment lien doesn't attach to the residence. Then the other thing we do, you'll see this revolving line of credit here. This family bank is a bank. It loans money. So one of the things we do right over here, we see this note and deed of trust. We arrange for you to have a home equity line of credit. That's this revolving credit line on your residence so that you can borrow money. Where does the money come from? It comes from the family bank. What does the family bank get to guarantee that you will repay that loan? It gets a mortgage on your residence. That's the note and deed of trust. So now the family bank is a secured creditor with a lien against the residence in priority ahead of all the bad guys out there, all the judgment creditors who might come along trying to grab that equity out of your house. So that puts the family bank in priority with a prior ability to acquire and secure its interest for that loan and recover that ahead of other people. So it's a device and a mechanism for protecting the equity in your house. And this is highly effective. And that's another way that this plan is integrated. These different entities, here we're involving, 4 different entities? The management company, on behalf of the family bank, signs loan documents loaning you money on a house that's owned by this LLC that's in turn owned partly by your revocable trust and partly by the irrevocable trust. So all these entities are involved in this transaction. It's a complex transaction, But why do we do it? It has the effect of provide several things, really good things, positive things. It provides cash flow to you in the event of an emergency. If you're having a meltdown situation, you're going to need money in that family bank to live on because you're in the middle of some kind of litigation or adverse event. And when you take that cash, what are you doing? You're drawing down the equity in your house so that who gets the equity in the house? You do, and the family bank does. And who does not get the equity in your house? The bad guys, the bad guys that are suing you. So we've protected the house.
Well, that's a lot. So you've talked about, just over the last hour, we've talked about protecting assets. We've talked about preserving the estate. We've talked about making money and things like that, and what people need to do to have a more integrated plan. What if a person has an interest in charitable giving? How does that integrate into this kind of planning?
So the essential elements of a full-blown, all the bells and whistles, Dynasty integrated plan include Dynasty trusts, both the revocable and the irrevocable, the family bank, the family office, and then the family foundation, and sometimes split interest gifts. Well, let's talk about the family foundation. And I want to identify a principle here that applies. There are some things that we think we own, but in fact, we don't own. Somebody else owns them, and they're going to come take them. And let me give you an example. If you are a business owner and you have employees and you withhold taxes from your employee's paycheck, that money might be in your account, but it's not your money. It's the government's money. And in fact, if you don't give it to the government when you're supposed to, really nasty, horrible things happen to you. So you better give the government its money. And often there are situations that arise in business, in tax planning, or in estate planning, or in just planning out structures, how they function over time, where you have a choice. There's going to be some assets or some money that you are either going to give to the politicians, it's either going to go to taxes, or you can give it to charity. And that's your choice. It's not yours. You can't give it to your kids. You don't get to spend it. You don't get to go buy a boat or a car with it. You don't get to use it on a vacation. Nope. One of two things. Either the politicians get it through taxes or it goes to charity. So if that's the case, let me suggest that the better option there is for it to go to charity, where especially if you can have a voice in what charitable uses those funds are deployed to support. And that's where this family foundation comes in. So we want to capture, in fact, this is one of the objectives we have over here. Look at this here. Capture dollars otherwise lost to taxes for the charitable mission. We want to capture those dollars. We don't want to send them to the politicians. Who do you trust more to make decisions concerning your money? You or the politicians? Who's gonna make a better decision, you or them? And I'm inclined to think you are. I think you can do a good job with your money. I think your kids can do a better job with your money than the politicians can. So let's capture those dollars. Let's put them in the family foundation. And they then have to be used for charitable purposes. Again, you can't buy them for a boat or to support your fancy lifestyle. You can't put the kids on the payroll. And with this family foundation, by the way, there's several types. There's private foundations. There's what are called support organizations. And what we show here in this diagram, which is a donor advised fund. And in recent decades, the donor advised fund has become the most popular and the most frequently employed for several reasons. They're really simple and easy to set up. They're very low cost to operate, typically 1% or less. And the bigger they are, the less they cost. And somebody else takes care of the hard part, which is the accounting and all the compliance with the IRS and vetting charitable donees to make sure that they're in compliance with the rules. And the family then gets to do the fun part, which is picking the charities. Yeah, I want to give it to this church or that school or this hospital or to this orphanage or this environmental cause or whatever. So the family gets to do the fun piece and somebody else does the hard, difficult piece. And let me give you an illustration of how this family foundation would be integrated into the plan. And I'm going to use the example we mentioned a few minutes ago of the overfunded IRA. So how do we know if an IRA is overfunded? An IRA is overfunded if it has more assets in it than the individual is going to need or want for their retirement. You say, well, I'm going to need to want all of it. Well, maybe, but are you? Let's do a budget. Let's figure out, what are you spending? What are you spending now? What are you going to spend then? And sometimes people really do need all their IRAs, but especially the bigger the IRA gets, the less likely you are to need it all. And then people start thinking, well, I'm not going to need that, so I want to give it to my kids. Well, how much would you get to give to your kids? Not all of it, because there's going to be a big, huge tax hit. So one of the strategies that's really cool is for you to take that money out of your IRA that you don't need. So you got this IRA up here, and you're going to take out what you need, and you're going to spend it. And you're going to take out what you don't need, and you're going to do this. Whoa. You're going to give that money that you don't need right over here to which? The Irrevocable Dynasty Trust. So what are you going to do with that money that you don't need? You're going to buy life insurance. Why do you buy life insurance? Because life insurance is one of the great mysterious devices of the modern age that few people understand. People who hate life insurance generally don't understand it. Life insurance produces tax-free benefits. IRAs are not tax-free, they're tax-deferred. Life insurance is tax-free. So we take the taxable money out of the IRA, we gift it down here to the Irrevocable Trust, we buy life insurance. So what is the family going to get? The family's going to get life insurance tax-free. What are mom and dad up here going to get? They're going to get whatever they need to during their retirement. Well, then there's going to be something left over. Mom and dad got all they needed for the retirement. The kids got all they needed tax-free through the Dynasty Trust. What do we do with the leftover stuff? And the answer is you put it in your foundation. So, and you'll see here on the potential beneficiaries for the IRA. Let me pull that up here so you can see that. Potential beneficiaries for the IRA. And it's got questions. The Dynasty Trust for the children or the family foundation, question mark. There are circumstances where the most tax efficient, logical, and rational beneficiary for the IRA, after mom and dad get all they need, after we provided everything we can tax-free to the kids, whatever's left over, where should it go? It should go to the family foundation. Why? Why do we send it to the family foundation? Because dollar for dollar, people ask us this question. I want to get 100% out of my money out of my IRA, and I want to pay zero taxes. How do I do that? And there's a way. Here's the way. When you die, have your IRA go to your family foundation. How much goes to taxes? Zero. How much goes to income taxes? Zero. How much goes to estate taxes? Even if your estate's over $20 million, how much goes to estate taxes out of your IRA when your IRA goes to your family foundation? And the answer is zero. So the money comes in there. So now, what the heck do we do with it? So we avoided taxes, and I call people who use charitable giving to avoid taxes, I call them the accidental or the reluctant philanthropist. They often come to the table not because they wanted to give money to charity, but because that was the nasty choice. It was either that or give it to the politicians. But then there's two other groups that really benefit by this. And the other one is the deliberate philanthropist. Some people, and bless your heart, I love these people, are in fact actually charitably minded. They recognize, hey, I've had help in my life and people have done really good things for me. I want to do good things for other people. I want to do what I can to make the world a better place. And so the Family Foundation can be a device for building and accumulating charitable capital and supporting charitable causes that you believe in, and keeping those funds as and like an endowment so that you get the benefit of those funds over multiple generations. And then the third group that benefits from the Family Foundation, remember, we want this to be, what is this program about? Integrated. So that means we're going to involve the family over multiple generations. Here's something we observe. In fact, this comes back to why the heck are we doing all this? What matters most here? And one of the things we see is that the way people structure their business and financial affairs has huge consequences for the people that they love, their family members, their children and grandchildren and other people that they love. And if we do it wrong, the way their business and state affairs are structured, it does damage to those people. And if we do it right, it helps them. So we've observed something. Some families get a little bit of money and it really messes them up. It destroys them. It turns them into good for nothing, rotten, lazy, self-indulgent trust babies. There's a reason why being a trust baby is a bad thing, not a good thing. And yet other families get money, have enormous sums of money over multiple generations. And they consistently turn out highly productive, powerful, good people who are leaders of their community and examples of goodness and spend their time and energy making the world a better place. And how do we get the good result and avoid the bad result? And we don't know all the answers, but we know this one. Families that turn out good individuals over multiple generations consistently have a deliberate, affirmative culture and plan for giving to charity as a family. So they employ these family foundations as a device in their family. Hey, we have a family business we make money at. Hey, we have a family Dynasty trust that owns the family cabin. Hey, we have a family foundation that we use as a family to support our charitable causes, and we all contribute to it, and we all have a voice in choosing where the money goes. And I've got to tell one quick story here. And this is an amalgamation of several situations, and details have been changed enough to protect the privacy of the individuals involved. But some years ago, I was working with a family, a very wealthy family that had a family foundation, and they had given each of their family members a charitable budget. And in this family meeting to which I was invited, there was a 10-year-old girl in the family who had a charitable budget, and she had one of those threefold, like a science project cardboard display, and it was my charity on it. And she had written up this pitch that she was presenting to grandma and grandpa and the aunts and uncles about her charity that she wanted to support. About, here's my charity, and here's why it's a good charity, and here's why you should support it. So she presented this to the family, and they grilled her. They asked her all kinds of questions, and then they had a conversation, and they said, okay, we're going to approve the grant. We're going to give these funds to the charity, to your charity. Way to go, sweetie. But here's the deal. In our family, they said, we don't send the check, we deliver the check. So we're going to make this grant on the condition that you go to this charity that you want to support and you volunteer, and they put a number on it. You spend this many hours in the coming year giving volunteer service at this charity. And so she did. And then a year later, follow up family meeting, another trifold cardboard presentation with my charity on it. And she had the after pictures. Here's pictures of all the things that she did and all the things that the foundation did with her money. So she came back and was accountable to the family for what happened with these charitable funds. Now, what impact did that have on this young woman? What effect did that have on the family? And let me tell you, today, that young woman is a mom, and she lives in a modest home, in a modest neighborhood, drives a 7-year-old Honda, sits on an empire worth hundreds of millions of dollars, and you wouldn't know it. She lives a reasonable, modest life and does a tremendous amount of giving and helping and building her community and doing good things for others. So that charitable planning has tax benefits. It has just making the world a better place kind of benefits, but it also has a big impact upon what it does for our family members. I talked too long on that, but that's one of the things I love.
Well, that's such a great story, talking about the influence that charitable giving has on an individual. So thank you. So I think we've gone through every, maybe not everything out there, but the entities, the structures that we include, as you mentioned, in integrated planning. One of the questions that I have is, So now you're that person who has this integrated planning in place. You have the Revocable Living Trust and the Irrevocable Dynasty Trust and the family office and the family bank and the family foundation. So now what? What do you do to make this integrated planning the best that it can be?
Yeah, so this kind of brings us back to the beginning of what we said at the first of this. That's your advisory team up here. To get the most out of a plan like this, you've got to have your advisors in the know. They need to know what you have, why you have it, how it works, how the pieces fit together, and what their role is. What's my job on the team? What do I do? Okay, if you're the real estate professional, you're advising on, hey, there's the rental property down here, the commercial building, let's get it rented out, let's replace it. Let's do a 1031 exchange. There's all kinds of things that the real estate professional is going to be involved in. If you're the CPA, okay, let's make sure that we count all the beans, that we keep track of what's where, that we've got the due tos and due froms, and we get the tax returns done. If you're the investment advisor, okay, we're tucking away the extra cash over here in the family bank or up here in the IRAs, or we're buying life insurance and stuffing cash into those. All those things need planning, and you have to use your advisor team. Let me mention that. Who's the quarterback? In the best scenarios where we get the best outcome, the quarterback is the client. I've seen some situations where the client has abdicated their quarterback role to somebody, to the financial advisor or to the CPA or to even the lawyer. And I get it. Sometimes they just lack the skill set or the interest level to do it. But that always dilutes the benefits that derive from the plan. The plan works best when the client is in charge and is running the show and is coordinating and directing the team members rather than leaving that up to somebody else.
So now the most important question of the day: how much does a full plan cost?
Yeah. Well, let's remember that not everybody needs all the full plan, and it's rare that somebody starts with the full plan. We want to start with what we need and then build as we go and build as we need it. I have another professional I work with who was in a meeting, and he was talking to somebody that had recently sold an internet company for $300 million, and the guy was young, and he goes, "So I'm poor. I only have $300 million. Do you think I need a trust?" And he was just woefully uninformed about, he was obviously brilliant in some areas, but he was not yet up to speed in this particular area. And so if you've got that kind of money, you need all this, and you're going to spend tens of thousands of dollars. But if you're starting out, you're not going to spend that. You're going to start out spending $2,000, $3,000, $4,000, and probably for each piece that you add, you're going to add about $3,000 to $5,000 for each piece that you add, kind of as a rough rule of thumb. It's not always that way. So a medical professional coming in who's got millions of dollars in an IRA and already has multiple rental properties and no trust and no planning, and they go, "Yeah, and I'm worried that I might get sued. In fact, 3 of my buddies got sued last year, and I don't want to be the next one." They're going to spend more because they need more, because they've gone further down the road and they just have been lucky so far, and we want to help them continue to be lucky by having proper planning in place. So entry level, you're going to start out realistically probably about $3,000, or well, if it's really simple, $1,500 for just basic documents. Mm-hmm. The other costs, I guess I should add, there's the setup cost. There's 2 other costs. There's a maintenance cost, and who are you going to pay to maintain this? And let me say, sadly, it's rarely the lawyer. The lawyer will do a few things to maintain this plan, but really we get paid on the setup, and then once you set it up, you got it. It's like, how often do you have to pay the car dealer? Once when you buy the car. But then what do you have to do with the car? Well, you have to have the oil changed and put on new tires and fix the windows when they get broken and all that kind of stuff. And who do you pay to do that? Not the car dealership, whoever you hire. So most of the time, the biggest maintenance cost goes to the accountant to do the accounting and the tax reporting on all that stuff. But then there's a third cost, and this is a real cost. If you look at this diagram, we'll put the diagram back up here because one last time here. There's a lot of pieces on there and lines going every which way, and there's different colors and complicated boxes. That's complicated. So another cost is the complexity cost, and that's a real cost, and we have to balance that against the benefits. And sometimes architects, engineers, CPAs, and sometimes medical professionals, sometimes they thrive on the complexity. They go, oh yeah, this is really cool. I get it. I understand it. This is great. But other people find that complexity overwhelming and intimidating. So maybe we don't do that. And we have to balance that and say, well, maybe because the complexity is overwhelming for you, let's search for some other solutions. And something else we see too, in fact, I've been doing this long enough and enough of my clients are of such an age, and the medical professional is a classic. While functioning as a medical professional, we're concerned about getting sued, and we're accumulating all this stuff, and we don't want to lose it through some catastrophic liability that comes along. But then, okay, well, I retire. I sell my practice. I'm not practicing medicine anymore. I don't do those dangerous things anymore. Nobody's going to sue me anymore. And now I want my life to be simple. So sometimes we set a lot of this up, and then as needs change, we dial it down. Or another option is, and we see this too, especially with the serial entrepreneur. Sometimes we dial it up while they're in growth phase, and then when they get into the phase of, I'm done, I don't want any of this anymore. But then we're shedding it, we're getting rid of it. Where's it going? We're not just throwing it away. Often we're moving it into the Dynasty Trust down here, the Irrevocable Dynasty Trust for the next generation. Often it's generation 2 or 3 or 4 that's taken over, and we're transitioning control or equity to that next group so that they can take the ball and run with it.
Thank you. So in your explanation of the family foundation, you mentioned that there's a way to get some significant tax benefits. So we've got a few minutes left here. Is there any other tax benefits that you would mention that are involved in integrated planning that we haven't talked about?
Yeah, so a crucial thing, a tax that catches people by surprise. They know about it, but they try not to think about it. And because they have control over when the taxable event occurs, it's often neglected in the planning, and that's the capital gains tax. And by the way, the U.S. does something really cool. You know that there's every asset has a cost, and if it appreciates in value, that gap between the cost and the appreciation, that's gain, and that gain is taxable. Well, when do we pay the tax? When there's a taxable event, when we dispose of the asset, when we sell it, or it passes to the next generation. Now, in the U.S., we have currently a step up in basis. So when we die, that cost basis steps up to the fair market value. So part of an integrated plan is we want to manage which assets and how many of the assets get that step up in basis. And we want to maximize that as long as we don't trigger an estate tax. So sometimes we're balancing, what do we put in the revocable trust? What do we put in the irrevocable trust to keep that step up in basis? The other thing is, if we have an asset that has highly appreciated and we're going to have the taxable event, we're selling the family business or the family farm, and we need to sell it, it's time to sell it, but there's going to be this big, huge taxable gain. Something on the diagram we really didn't spend a lot of time talking about, but let me drill in here and we'll just point to it and mention it, is this split interest gift idea. There are charitable devices where you can give something to charity, but you don't give it to charity while you're alive. Charity doesn't get it until you're dead, and you can keep the income interest. And we can use that split interest device to completely avoid capital gains, to get current tax deductions, and to create tax beneficial or tax advantaged income for a lifetime. And then we can use that income stream to create tax free benefits to beneficiaries when we die. So multiple layers of tax avoidance, lawful tax avoidance, tax deductions, and tax-free to heirs and tax-advantaged income. So that's through the creative use of split interest gifts, and that's a combination with the charitable thing. And this is an example of the kind of thing, if you're one of the advisors out there, for example, you don't need to know how to do that. What you need is our phone number. We know how to do it. And we can help you. And so that's a phone call to us. Hey, I have a client with this situation. Is this kind of thing you can help with? And we can. And the same if you're the client or potential client out there listening to us. Hey, I've got this situation. Maybe there's something we can do. And yeah, maybe there is. So that would be an appropriate phone call or a Zoom conference or a face-to-face meeting to explore what if anything can we do. And in fairness, sometimes we come up against things and we just can't fix them. And I will say, recently I had a woman come to me and she laid out this situation, and it was candidly horrific. It was awful. But all of the problems were not legal problems, and there were no legal solutions. Now, there were some emotional and psychological and maybe spiritual solutions, but none of the legal tools that we had would do anything to help any of her problems. So sometimes if we can't help, we'll tell you, hey, we can't help you. Let's hook you up with a counselor or with a person in your faith to help you, or with a family member or a support group or somebody else that can help you with, or with a CPA. It's not a legal problem, it's an accounting problem, or with an insurance person or an investment advisor. It's something that's somebody else on the advisory team that's not us needs to help you with. But if there are legal things that we can help you with, that's our niche. That's what we want to do, and that's where we can play best to your advantage.
Okay, well, we've covered a lot of ground talking about integrated planning, and certainly thank those of you who have joined us to think and consider some of these strategies and structures and things that are involved in integrated planning. And one of the things that I like to ask is, for those of you who are advisors who are out there listening, if there's just one person that you know that needs this kind of planning, then give us a call. Let us know, and we'll talk about it and see if we can help out. Also want to thank Rick. A lot of you know that he has been involved in this kind of work for 30 plus years, and we are the beneficiaries of his knowledge today. So appreciate him. And I'll ask you, Rick, if you have any other thoughts or things to close.
Yeah, my last thought is this: as you've listened to this, if you've endured to the end here, congratulations, you win a prize just for endurance if you could stick it out this long. But probably as you thought to this, something leapt into your mind, and you thought, I really should do something, and it'll be different for all of you. And whatever that was, whether it's I should call my mother, or I want French fries for dinner tonight, or whatever it was. Hopefully it was something about putting your affairs in order, but whatever it was that you thought that you should do that thing. Write it down right now so you don't forget. And whatever it is, do it. The purpose of any educational thing like this is to change you. And if it doesn't result in some action that constitutes change, then you wasted your time, and so did we. So hopefully we triggered some change. Hopefully you thought of something you can do to make your life or your planning or your family or the people you help and love and work with, that you can improve the situation for them and make things better. So whatever that is, do that. That's my final word.
All right. Well, thank you. And just a reminder, you can watch this again if it's something where you got caught up in maybe some things that didn't quite make sense, and you want to watch some parts over again. It's available on our YouTube channel. And if you have any additional questions, certainly feel free to call us. We'd be glad to help and answer your questions.
All right. Signing off. It's been great. Thanks, everyone.